very interesting. And now we're moving to the next presentation. We're ready for another live speaker. He's a fellow Greek, but living in New York City, and he's been quarantined here in Athens. So we had the opportunity to have him live. Stephan Clabaneva, and Stephan, or Stephanos, is a board member of the Industrial Designers Society of America. IDSA is a non-profit organization that they actually do this thing that Paschalis was just telling us. They foster and they promote the integration of circular economy practices in the value chain. Stephan, they did some incredible stuff in the United States, promoting in the industrial designers industry all this sustainability and circular economy principles. He actually emailed me like 3 months ago and said, you're putting a very interesting forum together. I want to speak. I'm going to be in Greece, and let's try and deliver the knowledge about industrial design. We never had such a presentation in our forum before, as Stephanos now is getting ready. So we will be very excited to hear what he has to say. And so we are ready to go with his presentation, Designing for Circularity. So the second presentation on circular economy today. So I would like to invite Stephan. Stephan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. As I said, I'm very excited to be here to present this topic because I think there's not a lot of other, except for Oramik perhaps, there's not an awful lot of other creatives in the panel, in the presentations today. So I'm really excited to be here. A little bit about myself, and then we'll get into the presentation. So first of all, again, this is the kind of the topic that we're going to be covering. In actual fact, when we look at this, I sort of describe myself as a hybrid systems thinking designer, ideator, inventor, pie-shaped. So I use the Greek letter pi to describe myself. Design plus business, design plus sustainability, innovation plus sustainability, a circular design evangelist, and a citizen of the world and third culture kid, because I happen to be born in the US from American mother and a Greek father. So super excited to be here. I said we are, we're talking about a circular systems thinking approach, because one of the things that Mihaly wanted to have me talk about is, he loved this notion of design thinking. And I think as designers, we need to make sure that we educate and provide awareness as to what that is. So it's super important to sort of make sure that we communicate that and explain what that really means for non-designers. So that's one of the things that I'm here to talk about. So again, just as a quick kind of preparation to kind of show you where I'm coming from. I have I'm somebody that comes from was born in the United States in San Francisco. That's where I got my genes, and that is another place of where I got sort of the DNA. But in Greece is where I got my culture. So I have to say that's it's a pleasure for me to be here today and talk a little bit about the topic that we're covering. But something really important is where I also got my design chops, and that is New York City. So if I look at that, that's kind of where my experience in design, my design innovation, my focus on sustainability became very, very important. So wanted to kind of kick things off with going through to the sort of the next slide is to really kick off the presentation. So when we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to say that we are, we have an opportunity to really sort of think about things. There has been, if we start about thinking about this, when I was stuck at home to mitigate the impact of COVID-19, it had me thinking of the 2008 essay by Michael Cannon, which is Design Loves a Depression. And I have to say that following the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, I also been thinking about planet Earth. So the global pandemic has me urging to define what designers and innovators need to do for sustainability and climate change. There are many articles that sort of argue how interconnected these pandemics actually are. What I would like to also highlight is that there is actually 4 things going on. It's not just a health pandemic. There's a social pandemic. There's an economic pandemic, and there is a obviously climate pandemic. These are all interconnected. And so when we were in New York City at 7 o'clock every night, everybody would get out, open their windows, and they would clap for the doctors. So that's a great idea, but why stop there? We need to do more. Why don't we emulate them? So my whole point about kicking things off with Design for Circularity is to point out that we have an opportunity to leverage, for example, the notion that we have here, which is what doctors take, which is called the oath, the Hippocratic Oath. Why don't we emulate them, emulate these doctors, and actually take an oath ourselves to first do no harm? Wouldn't it be great if we can spend that opportunity to really make an impact at a global level like this? So, the idea is, what if we take that concept and apply it to everything that we do, no matter who you work for and what you do, so we can have an impact from across the globe. So with that sort of brief introduction, I wanted to point out the fact that when I'm going to be talking about design for sustainability, we need to have these principles driven by design. Why? Because research will tell you, including my own from decades ago, that 80% of the entire cost of a project are determined in the initial 20% of a particular process. And as my esteemed speaker previously from Nestlé just said, he showed us a beautiful slide about the entire process, the entire product development process. And at the front of that process, he showed innovation. So innovation and design really are at that front beginning starting point. So if you look at that, that's where exactly we need to be focusing our energy on, because then everything else is baked into the process, and it's very difficult to change. So when we talk about that, that's where I'm going to be covering some of the points that we're talking about today. So 3 points. I'm talking about sustainable strategy, sustainable processes, and sustainable product or experience. As a designer, I need to make sure that we focus on all 3 of those particular axes, because they're equally important. One of these, sort of the focus on these are very key. We have to have a triple sort of focus like this, just like we have a triple bottom line, because there's so many things going on today that we have no way of keeping track. For example, we just had announcements from Sir Ian Atchison and the Prince in the UK about a new Earth Shot, which is a huge prize, $50 million. Actually 50 million pounds over the next 10 years to foster innovation. So that's the kind of stuff that we need to be driving to make sure that we have an impact. The second thing that's really important is sustainable process. And sustainable process is the tools, the technologies, the capabilities that need to be adopted, such as design for circularity principles, the Ocala eco-design principles that were developed by IDSA more than 12 years ago, certain key directives that can be adopted by each company depending on the industry that you're coming from, and et cetera, et cetera. And last but not least, the sustainable product experience, which are what are the case studies or what are the amazing products that we can use as examples for our own industry to sort of adopt that particular strategy. So if we were to go into a little bit more on the sustainable strategy side of things, I'm going to kick that off by stating that there's one example that we want to bring, and that's exactly coming from the UN. The UN has, obviously, we should all be aware of the 17 SDGs. So is it because of the fact that we're dealing with tremendously overburdened Earth right now, we have to really understand that this is an opportunity for us to really push forward all the focus areas that we have on those 17 different SDGs. So it's not just about the ones that are obvious. Depending on the industry, we have to make sure that we focus on all of those different SDGs depending on the focus that we have in our particular directives. One of the other areas that I would like to focus in on is opportunities to redefine our own business model. So as a designer, we're in the beginning of the process, design and innovation. But if you're working for a company that is still, for example, not a B Corp, business is a force for good. So what does that mean? You can be in the green and you can be in the black. There's a lot of different organizations that we can be inspired by. So for those that are in the outdoor space, Patagonia is a great example. For new products, we just heard Nestle's example, and then we have a number of different brands from across the world that are really starting this new journey, and they've been transformed their organization from a regular corporation to what is called a B Corp. One of the other things that I wanted to highlight from a strategy perspective is the sustainable example from our folks at Mormendi. Mormendi is an example of a design organization out in Spain, and they were actually at our design conference back in June. And one of the things that they were looking at was the bigger picture of things. And the bigger picture of things, when we look at this, is it's not just what we design for today as a product or the experience or for the organization that you're working for, but then you have to go and think about your unintended consequences and be sort of forward-looking into what is the society's impact, what is the governmental impact, and what is sort of the planetary impact that we have on the decisions that we make as designers. So that's really a very aspirational way of explaining this. One other thing that I wanted to highlight is moving into a sustainable process is the ability of leveraging the strategies that we have across the globe to adopt, whether it's yet leveraging new design tools or principles, for example, from the Helen MacArthur Foundation. Their three principles are design out the cost of waste and production, keeping the products and the materials in use for longer, and regenerate, so create natural systems. And another example that I wanted to highlight when it comes to sustainable processes is example from a company that develops as a consultancy for materials. So if you're looking at selections and options that you might need to have for types of products, the company that you should be asking information about is called Material Connection. And one of the things that we were talking about in one of the dinners last night is there's no such thing as a sustainable material. That might be a little provocative for many, But what that really means is it doesn't matter how sustainable the product that you select or the material that you select is, it's how you use it that's really important. And that's something that was highlighted very importantly to our audience by Dr. Andrew Dent from the Material Connections, the VP of Material Connections. And one other example I'm going to leave you with from eco-design sort of processes is the tools themselves. Whether it's, for example, design tools that Autodesk or all the other product development companies provide, such as Dassault Systems or Siemens PLM, or life cycle assessment tools, like the tools from Sustainable Minds. Those are examples of tools that our organization has been supporting the development for and promoting for our designers. Because really and truly, if you have, let's say, an example of a product, how do you, unless you create a baseline to understand where that material and where the bill of materials, what's inside that tool or that thing that you develop, it has in terms of cost, materials, recyclability options, unless you really have a baseline and understand what that is, you're not going to be able to improve it. So these are the kinds of tools that you can leverage today to improve on the processes that you're, in terms of your product development process, whether it's a packaging of a particular product or it's a complicated product like building an automobile or an aircraft. One of the things that we did for this is the Eco Design Challenge, where we had designers reinvent a toaster. And that's exactly the kind of real tangible challenge that gets them going and had them develop an opportunity to test all three of those aspects that we talked about: the strategy, the processes or the tools to use to adopt, and the final design of that particular product. Another example that we should be applying in Athens, in Greece as a whole, is the donut model. So Amsterdam is a city that has been focusing on this and thinking of the strategies, the holistic strategies that they can adopt to develop and rethink of the entire city from end to end, including all of the services that a city provides, and not looking at things disconnected, but connecting them all together in an environment that allows you to sort of look at the bigger picture. And when you look at that, it was developed by the British economist Kate Raworth, and sort of highlights the inadequacies of the current systems that we have today. So that, you know, you're not pulling one service at the expense of another. You're not impacting, you're not solving a traffic problem and creating a pedestrian problem, and so on and so forth. So you can sort of see the holistic impact that something like this can be done. So this is a model that can be adopted, implemented and adopted at any level: governmental, city, local, and state. Finally, let's end with some examples of wonderful looking products. If we were to think about what would be the sustainable product or the sustainable experience that you would like to sort of see, we saw some great examples from what the Nespresso brand is doing in terms of recycling and creating a circular business model. I'd love to sort of see the details of what that really means, because the devil's in the details. But if you go back decades before to a famous designer, we look at examples of Dieter Rams. Dieter Rams is a very famous designer. Anybody that remembers used to wake up to the Brown alarm clock, that particular beep, 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 beep sound, that was from Dieter Rams' design. So very eclectic design. He had 10 principles, and 3 of those principles were around sustainability and circularity, and that was decades ago. And we're still here, 2020, and we still haven't adopted all these across every example. Other product experiences that I'm going to highlight are a great company called TerraCycle and the startup Loop. This is a company that has transformed the adoption of circular economy principles into everyday brands. And how? They are upcycling, they are increasing the brand value from a particular product, by reinventing the supply chain stream, the recyclability model, and really creating a whole new product. But it's not a new idea. Believe it or not, this idea came from the folks that you used to get your milk from. So 40, 50 years ago, you had somebody like your milkman get up in the morning and bring you a bunch of fresh milk in a glass bottle. Why can't we do that today? Why can't we rethink, since we have optimal design value chains, why can't we take every product that we buy in the supermarket and create it, make it circular? Once we get that opportunity, you'll see the impact you can have at a grand scale. For those that, because there's a huge construction market in the Athens market, I wanted to highlight an example of a company that makes circular flooring products. It's called IDSA. They're pioneers of the cradle-to-cradle approach. So it's a wonderful, beautiful looking design product, but it also has a way, they programmed the way to recycle the products at the end of their use. So Stephan was the CEO of IDSA, and he's the one that really made the impact here and pushed everybody to say, you know what, we may not have 50 product lines, maybe we'll have 40 now, but those 40 are going to be circular. And that's sort of the approach that you should be having anyway. And then if we go to the sort of the example of a studio, an architectural studio that's doing some amazing things, I think that's a great example of the type of strategy that can be adopted in a country like Greece. And Super Use Studios is finding local materials that people don't want. So in Greece, we call them baza, okay? And imagine for other people's garbage becomes your raw material to build something new. So what a concept, being able to get to a point where you are finding a free natural resource that is somebody else's garbage, and you're turning it into wonderful new designs. So with that, I'm going to point out last example of a product that's very interesting for me to highlight because it's a creation of a superstar designer called Yves Bahar. If you haven't heard of him, definitely look him up, because this is not the only thing by any stretch of the imagination that he's done, but a very accomplished designer, a bit of a diva, if I may say so myself, but he knows me, so he won't take that in the wrong way. But the idea of design that can have an impact on the entire product development process, from ideation and innovation all the way to supply chain and beyond, and logistics. And what I mean by that is the Puma strategy for sending, like any other shoe company around the world, they send their shoes around the world in boxes. And the strategy for that is pretty much, you put your shoes in a box, you put a box on a crate, put the crate in a truck, or put it in a container, put that on the ship, and ship it around the world. So the challenge you have is you have a tremendous amount of weight, not by the shoes themselves often, but by the container that the shoes go in. So here's an example, and I have a video for this, but I think we may not be able to show it depending. It's only about a minute long, but before we get into that, the focus is, imagine if you can solve the problem by redesigning the entire system. Why does there need to be a box? And that's the solution that this designer came up with. He didn't design the shoe itself, he designed the container for the shoe. So that's where design comes in and changes the game from a completely different perspective than what you thought possible. So he eliminated the box completely, and the project that you can find and watch the video for yourselves is called the Clever Little Bag. So basically, he just created a structural component that was able to support the shoes in a protective environment so they could be shipped around the world, but he was able to reduce shipping weight by 65%. So I'm not going to get into all the other statistics that you can imagine are full of that, chock full of that video, but You can see it for yourself. It's super interesting. And I'm going to end this presentation with a little bit of inspiration, because this is the kind of work that I do, is that I kind of help people solve big problems, or what we call wicked problems. And there's three scenarios that we can talk about. One is sustainable use. So from the city that I come from, New York City, we have what was called the Highline program. So that's where a project that was an eyesore for many was upscaled. It was created a whole new second life by creating a wonderful urban park that happens to be a tremendous opportunity for folks around anywhere in New York to be able to leverage. Other examples that we can talk about are honest products. So what kind of brands have really defined sustainability and circularity within their DNA, whether it's brands in the automotive world, whether it's products that you can buy in the supermarket chain, or things that are now, for example, the Honest brand that are supported by all sorts of different celebrities around the world, to kind of instill in us the ability that you can buy something that's still reasonable, but happens to be circular because it's baked into the price. And then one last thing I'll end with is the notion of cradle to cradle. Is something that can be adopted by any industry across the world. It's basically circularity and closed loop systems baked in. So what if the lighting fixture that you purchased at the supermarket, at your local hardware store, the packaging that the light fixture came in was actually the light fixture itself? What if the beer bottle that you were used to having that was made out of glass, that was 10 times heavier than it really needed to be, could be something that could be compostable? There's a lot of organizations in Europe and beyond that are now pushing the fact that they want to really drive that kind of a transformation into that historical, well, we always did it this way. Well, does it have to really be that way nowadays that we have the ability to truly transform an industry from within? So those are the kinds of things that that we're pushing. Another final example is another great designer called Tom Dixon out of the UK, who's really built his whole business from the ground up as being sustainable and circular. So with those sort of things that I wanted to end with, I'm going to sort of wrap it up by saying, there is no need to mass produce everything that we used to. The idea of having to push for growth all the time just because we can doesn't mean we should. And designers are at the forefront of that, because the decisions that they make every day will impact things for years to come. So just 3D print on demand. Make things as you need them. And that goes for every industry, regardless of where we're from. I think we can change the way and change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephan, for this inspiring presentation. We actually had the pleasure of bringing Michael Brangon himself, one of the founders of the Cradle to Cradle initiative, it was 9 years ago in Athens, when he presented the Cradle to Cradle concept. Just a quick question before I let you go. You sit in the forefront of transforming the consumer, right? So because if you give me the packaging, as we said before, in a completely new way, I will use it. So what would you recommend now to all companies that are transforming their designing systems as the first step towards this revolution that's coming?
Well,
just one piece of advice.
One piece of advice. Think of your end user. Think of the consumer. They're smarter than you think. Especially the younger generation. Their value system is completely different. So apply the design principle, human-centered design. So put the human at the center of everything. At this point, maybe I will push one step further and say, put human the planet and your business. You can do that. You can be green and make green. Or another way, you can be green and be in the black. Because this is something that works both ways, but you have to take a diligent approach to solving that problem. So that's what I would end with. Put the human, put the consumer at the center, educate them as to why you're doing what you're doing, be honest with them, and you will be rewarded. And we have plenty of examples like that from around the world.
Very useful examples. Thank you very much. Appreciate your presence here. Thank you.